All right, what's up, everybody? This is episode 10, The Rising Tide. I'm your co-host, Dayton and Dale, here with my other co-host,
Dale Smith.
All right, we got an excellent episode for you today. So our first story is a local story. Rising Tide went and did some on-the-street coverage of a rally last weekend. It was a rally organized by the Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression in response to the killing of a man in Oakland last Monday. Last Monday was July 13th, so this man was killed in the early hours of July 13th. And so it was a vigil rally organized by that organization. Other folks like Freedom Road Socialist Organization were out there. Urban Peace Movement 510 were out there, as well as just general community members. So it was really interesting just to be out in community with folks, raising awareness around this issue. And so the big issue with this killing is that, Oakland police have released almost no information. Not even the man's name. We don't even know who this man is that was killed, right? We don't know the exact circumstances. We don't have any body cam footage. There's no flock camera footage because, he was killed in front of two different flock cameras, right? And so, I was having a good conversation with one of the youth activists today. I believe they were from the Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression and the Urban Peace Movement. And the big thing was just, folks just asking, and this is a big thing with a lot of the liberal anti-police brutality groups. The whole thing is like, we want you to follow the law. You have to follow the law. They can't do any of this stuff. They have to give us the footage. They have to be transparent. But I think that the consistent issue is that whenever they don't want to be transparent, they're not. Right? And then we're just reduced to rallies out on a street corner, getting them to follow basic laws that have been on the books already, right? And it was interesting talking to, some of these activists out there were, 17 years old, right? So it was interesting, as a 33-year-old talking to some of these 17-year-olds just about, them having this basic expectation that police are supposed to follow the law, right? And then having to sort of share my own experience that, I've seen so many of these legislations get put in place, I'm old enough to where I saw body cameras get introduced. I'm old enough to where I was around when they updated these use of force doctrines, I've seen all these new restraints put on local law enforcement time and time again. I've seen them also flagrantly violated, and so I think, that's just the important thing to make clear within these different rallies, right? It's more than just demanding them to follow the basic law. We actually ultimately have to be really critical of this entire system, that which there's a whole class of people that just get to shoot and kill with impunity if they're determined to be a threat, right? And so I think that was the biggest issue, because again, we don't know anything about this guy, right? It seems like he was a man in a homeless encampment. He was chased by law enforcement and then was just gunned down when he turned around, and apparently he may have had a knife or something, right? And so I think this is the reality for a lot of communities out here where, there's no real communication with law enforcement. There's all of this talk of them, following the basic law, that they won't do. But I think, as we kind of made clear to the youth, the key thing was actually that folks are actually paying attention to this, right? Because I think, in the community of the Bay Area, there is a lot of fatigue. There's a lot of fatigue around trying to fight police brutality. I think, despite what the liberal media would, besides what the conservative media pundits might say, the liberal left, these democratic cities, we haven't managed to defund one single police department. Right? In the Bay Area, not one police department has seen its budgets cut at any point. I don't think you can, find one local police department in the entire United States that's had their budget cut, if not expanded, since the George Floyd protests of 2020. And so I think, that's a reality, right? That's a reality where we have not been able to make one single concrete step forward using the regular tactics of arguing for liberal reforms, having rallies that are sometimes peaceful, sometimes devolve into spontaneous uprisings of people. Like that really is not moving the needle on this stuff. OPD, for instance, has killed 3 people this year, unarmed people this year. We're in July. It's reasonable to assume it's going to increase. But again, the key thing was that there was people out actually fighting this stuff, trying to raise awareness of this issue. And so this is a developing story. And so we hope we'll have some more details to report on. Dale, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good you were able to go out there and talk to different folks that were protesting this. I do think you're right. There is just like a lot of fatigue around people protesting police brutality, just because it's like it's just exhausting. Even having been a part of this stuff in some capacity, or at least aware of it for like a decade. Like, people asking for these really basic things. I think it was like 10 years ago, the Obama administration basically came up with this like blue ribbon report. And a lot of what activists were asking for is like, all police departments need to follow by this. SFPD definitely didn't do that. OPD definitely didn't do that. Probably pretty much every police department across the nation didn't actually follow through with all those reforms. And all the while we're seeing, the increase in like militarization from the police, and there's, they always try and throw up smoke as to why it's like, oh, we, can't release this evidence, this investigation is still pending, that sort of stuff. But when it's in their actual interest to release the body cam footage right away, they can do that. They've shown that they can they can upload that stuff the very same day, release it to everybody unedited. But the whole reason why they don't is because they understand that it'll compromise. It might not compromise their position, but it'll compromise the optics around it. And I think that's really what the majority of law enforcement agencies are looking to do, is control the narrative and control the optics around this, by making as much of this information as, inaccessible as possible, even though realistically, like, we as people who live in this country, whether you're a citizen or not, we have the right to this information, and it's pretty sad, honestly, because we've seen, like, as they've introduced these newer forms of technology, it doesn't lead to increased accountability. It doesn't lead to a decrease in there being these types of incidents where people are hurt or people are killed by the police. This ends up happening more because they end up feeling more emboldened, despite the fact that, these technology companies are pretty sketchy. Axon, who is the company that makes the body cameras, they were the ones that made tasers, and they've gotten caught red-handed many times over the years for lying about their products, and the capabilities and, like, what they actually do, that the fact that they're making weapons that kill people or could seriously injure them long term, instead of, how they frame it as like, oh, this is a safer alternative. It's like, wouldn't you rather get shocked than shot? And it's like, well, it's not really an option. You're basically giving them more tools to use. And, just as one last example, like the stuff with the flock stuff is super frustrating, because it's like, there's been tons of activists that have shown that Flock is just a really careless company. Their security is really poor. When they hand this infrastructure off, these devices off to these law enforcement agencies, they do a really poor job of implementing that. And what does that open the door to? It allows people to just like go on the internet and like start surveilling other people, as if it wasn't scary enough that the government suddenly has a capacity to start spying on people. Now you're just giving random people the ability to spy on people in the most, ridiculous situations. It's like, why is there like a flock camera pointed at a playground? That sort of thing. It's like that shouldn't even be there to begin with, even if people are like going along with this idea of like, oh, well, they're going to kidnap the kids and that sort of stuff. It's like, well, have you seen who's in charge of this country? Do you really think they give a shit about kids here or anywhere else? So it's, I mean, all this stuff isn't surprising, but I think it's really good you made your way out there this past weekend to talk to folks. It'll be interesting to see how this develops over time, if it'll end up, building up some more momentum over time. And I think, yeah, just in general, it's good that we're, trying our best to keep our finger on the pulse with this stuff, because it's really important to get these, get this message out there, because there's not really a whole lot of people talking about this incident, or a lot of other things that are happening that deserve to be highlighted. So yeah.
Oh yeah. And I think, it's it's like why we have to keep our finger on these issues. And more importantly, why we have to, fight the fatigue. But more importantly, you have to kind of critique the strategy, right? Because I think that we have to be very clear. What is it we're doing? I was having a conversation with an older comrade recently, and he was making the key point that most activists lack an analysis, right? We don't have an analysis of what's going on in this world, right? We're just responding to things that we don't like more often than not, and I think that's important, right? We have to, if you see something, do something about it, right? Don't just complain, don't just be upset, take some action. But more importantly, with that analysis of actually understanding why these things are going on and how we can address these issues, we're not going to get anywhere, and I think that kind of even leads us to our next story, as we kind of take a step back from this rally in Oakland, because there was another protest last week as well. This was just a couple days before the rally we went to on Saturday. This one was a national rally that was in response to some recent killings by specifically ICE officers, right? So now we're talking about going from local police killing people in our communities to ICE officers killing people nationally, right? And so this protest had three key demands tying into that. The first two are just justice for two immigrant men killed by ICE, justice for Lorenzo Salgado Araujo and justice for Juan Sebastian Guerrero. Lorenzo Salgado was killed in Houston, and Juan Sebastian Guerrero was killed in Maine. These are both immigrant men who were pulled over by ICE. Neither were the target of actual deportation orders, nor were either of them their legal status in peril any type. ICE had no reason to be interacting with these men aside from just profiling them because they knew them to be immigrants. And then during each of these police encounters, both men were shot and killed. It's unclear. I think in Maine, the argument right now the police are making was that they pulled him over for drugs, and then somehow that manages to justify killing him. The same with Houston. It's not clear exactly what was the justification by ICE officers. It seems that he may have mouthed off or didn't accept ICE officers' a right to detain him, because they did not have the right to detain him because his legal status was not valid.
They were from what I read, they were just searching for two other suspects.
Yeah.
And then they found him, and then they were just, at that point, they just were like, oh, well, we found somebody, so that's all we really care about.
Yep. And they're dead now.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And then the third demand, which I think is very important, it's going to tie into some other things we've been talking about on the channel, and that's that they want to stop the Department of Justice persecution of Nadia Topete and the immigrant rights movement. This is also very interesting because Nadia Topete, she is a member of this organization called the Community Service Organization, specifically the Community Service Organization of Los Angeles, and she distinguished herself over the last year and a half. For the last year. We're not just using calendars, but over the last, actually probably beyond that. We don't have a lot of information about her right now. But she's been an immigrant rights activist over in the Los Angeles area, helping defend immigrant people from ICE raids. And she was recently subpoenaed by the Department of Justice to testify in front of a grand jury. She doesn't know what for, right? She wasn't given any evidence, any indication about what she was being asked, legally compelled to testify on. And so, on July 8th, I believe, she went into that hearing and, she pled the Fifth Amendment. She refused to testify as her constitutional right. And it's unclear if she's going to be held in contempt for this. It's unclear if they're going to continue this pressure. But I think it's just another indication of the current administration using the Department of Justice as an explicit political tool. Because even if Trump wasn't a corrupt right-wing fascist, Department of Justice would still fucking suck. Let's be very clear. The DOJ, as always, fucking sucks, fuck pigs. But specifically, we see how the Trump administration really has been using the Department of Justice specifically as like an explicit political tool to go after rivals in government and also run-of-the-mill activists who get in the way of the regime's priorities, right? And so, we can connect this more, but I think I want to just pause a little bit and focus on this issue more before we talk about the larger issue. So, Dale, do you have some commentary on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's unfortunate that these couple of people lost their lives this past couple weeks, but I think that's, that's just kind of where we're at right now. It's like ICE is operating without impunity. There is this, I talked a little bit about this in a news update a couple weeks ago, but there were thousands of people that were detained at the end of June. It seems like there's this pattern of like there being like a summer surge. Seems to, be consistently happening. And it's leading to more people being detained, more people being killed. And I think just generally the idea is the state is trying to basically paint any sort of even like tepid opposition as terrorism. We talked about, I want to say earlier this year, about the National Presidential Security Memorandum 7. There's been some movement on that over the past 6 months or so. And I think like different politicians are looking for ways to really take this to the next step. Like I think there was an interesting piece that Ken Klippenstein, who is the person that initially did the excellent reporting on NPSM 7. He was talking about how there was a summit that was put together by none other than Senator Marco Rubio, everyone's favorite Cuban expat, where he's basically, he named like 43 different Americans and groups that he saw as being communist because of their association with Cuba for whatever reason. And this list was pretty wide spanning. I still think it is like, we're still at the point where who they're targeting is kind of like among the mainstream, more or less, because if you look at who they were naming, it's like the Amazon Labor Union, Antifa generally. They were looking at Hassan Piker, Black Alliance for Peace, BLM, Chesa Boudin, DSA, and so I think it's like, it's kind of ridiculous, just some of the people that are listed on here, like George Floyd, for one. It's like, the man's dead. What the fuck are you going to dig up on a dead man? But I think it just shows, like, generally how they're looking to connect the dots between, opposition to this present administration and the system to, like, their vague idea of terrorism. And you can see, like, in some ways, they're just, like, throwing darts at a board. They're really just like, what can we get to stick? And some of these are closer than others. But I still think this is a scary direction things are going. But it's clear, on one hand, as scary as it is, at the same time, we're not quite at the point where they're really, like, narrowing in on, like, okay, like, these are the folks who are really effective organizers. These are the folks who are, like, really about it. They're just looking at things in the more general in terms of like, oh, we don't like BLM, so like we're just gonna call them terrorists, instead of like, going after the people who are really committed revolutionaries, or really just committed progressive activists. It's borderline at this point. Is what I'm trying to say. I don't know. That's just kind of what's on my mind when we're talking about this.
Oh yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting thing because on one hand, the average like government bureaucrat doesn't really know how community organizing works, right?
Yeah.
They don't know like what motive. They don't even know like if you ask any of these people, like you ask the Trump administration what motivates activists, they'll like it's just racist dog whistling. They don't understand what motivates the average grassroots activist, right? Like they just have like this hyper nationalist bend on it, and there's a liberal version of that basic misunderstanding as well. And so what I mean when I say that is these people don't really know how to disrupt the movement. But also more importantly, they don't have to try that hard, right? Like I think that's the reason why that these lists are so vague is because they're not actually, these aren't lists of people that they're trying to just treat the same way. What I mean is like they don't have any reason, they're not gonna dig up George Floyd and try to arrest him. Right? They might try to take down some monuments to George Floyd. They might clamp down on attempts to turn the day of his death or his birthday into, say, a holiday or something. They'll continue to use him as a racist dog whistle, which is really just it is. No one knows anything about George Floyd, but they just like to make fun of him because he's like a black cultural figure. And so they do. And then with the rest of these, like, clamping down on liberal pundits, it just kind of shows like it's really just they're just throwing smoke up everywhere, right? Obviously, it could escalate into more serious things. Yeah, they could find some reason to give like Amy Goodman problems to
Or
give
like,
us.
Yeah, the situation with the Prairie Land case where they're basically saying like, oh, because you were passing out all this literature, that makes you Antifa and you're a terrorist.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So there are some examples, but
No,
yeah.
but I mean, like, when we say these lists, like, it's a very general attempt to blow up smoke. But at the same time, we see an underlying pattern of them actually clamping down activists, right? Like what's going on with Prairie Land, like the Golden Gate 26, like Nadia Topete, right? These are all like actual incidences of heightened oppression, like concrete increased oppression, right? We're handing out a zine and now you're getting 10 years in prison because you were in a rally in which a police officer was injured, right? And so that is the legal standard right now, which is already pretty, we should be very clear, is a marked change, right? That means something. Why was the Golden Gate 26, why were so many of them swept up? Well, because for one, for over 30 years, it's been like a Bay Area staple to block bridges. It's like a Bay Area staple where it's considered a fun thing to do. It's fun, it's easy, you don't have to think about it. But now they're handing out 5, 10, 15-year charges for doing that. When before, it wouldn't even be a fine. It would just be a slap on the wrist, right? So that is like a change in the political landscape. And for a place like the Bay Area, it's had disastrous consequences because we have all these liberal groups that like got together, tried to block freeways like they've been doing for decades. And now like they're dealing with major charges. And I don't mean to laugh at it to be like flippant about what's going on with them, but we really have to understand like how our own sort of our liberal rituals are understood by the state and they will be exploited by the state, right? Like we can't just, we have this reputation, particularly the Bay Area, being some kind of riot capital. And we have to understand, like Oakland, San Francisco, these places are only riot capitals because the United States government allows it and likes it because they can scare white people in Minnesota. If they ever want to clamp down on the crust punk movement here in East Bay or the Bay Area, it's already been done. It's already happened. They already all intern for local politicians anyway in their spare time. They're already been co-opted. They don't need to, right? And so I think we have to really see that we're in a situation where more and more regular types of activism will face higher criminal penalties. Criminal penalties where there were previously no criminal penalties. And at the same time, we see this looming threat of like some larger crackdown. Is there going to be a list where people are all going to be subpoenaed to go speak in front of grand juries? And that was the Red Scare. That was the Palmer race. That was the crux of it. Was just asking, was subpoenaing people to testify and then using those testimony to then fabricate charges on people. All it takes is a slight change in the political climate for that to happen. Because if we've seen, there's no organized resistance against this Trump administration outside of grassroots activists that are not operating on the national level. There's no Democratic coalition to oppose Trump. There's no clique within the Department of Justice working to make sure Trump follows the Constitution. There's not, some secret, the squad is not organizing resistance on the low to overthrow Trump and replace him with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Kamala Harris next election. No one is coming except for us. That's it, right? And they don't need to do that much to misdirect and arrest us. They don't need to. And so why it's on us to get better organized and acknowledge what's going on. Because these crackdowns are coming. And historically, groups groups overestimate how long they're going to be able to operate openly. And then when the political climate changes, folks end up in prison.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think with this sort of stuff, there has been, for a long time, this sort of more, laissez-faire attitude around protests. I do think in the past, different police agencies have been pretty lenient with how they've dealt with protesters at times. Not to say that I haven't seen people be kettled and arrested and doing sorts of stuff, but I feel like the tolerance for doing some sort of spontaneous protest or taking over a freeway has been much larger than it would have been in other places in the country around the same time. And I think with that kind of comes this idea that a lot of people have that the spontaneous is where it's at, I've seen this trend. This has been a dominant idea that's existed with different people for a long time in different ways in different places. It's not unique to the Bay Area, but I remember in the early 2010s around Occupy when there was the big port shutdown, and then a week later, some people I knew who were oh, let's do that again. It's yeah, but none of the dock workers want to do it again. So what is the point, Or even during 2024, after all the student encampments happened, there was some small group that thought it was a good idea to set up an encampment in front of the federal building. And they got pretty messed up within an hour, And I think that just kind of speaks to just the level of organization a lot of people have and the awareness of stuff. And I think this is just something that's going to have to change over time because people are going to have to, not fall into a place where they're being too careless about things, but also not overly paranoid about every little thing is going to get them wrapped up. I mean, obviously, things are getting a bit more serious over time. Things can certainly change overnight, but I think it ultimately comes down to people just understanding the situation and responding accordingly. The freedoms that we're allowed now, they might be slipping away. They might be gone one day. We can make the most of them at the moment, but we can't expect them to always be there. And we, just can't always take them for granted. So, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, the only real solution is we have to get more organized, right? We have to understand what's going on in our communities. We have to take a stand when activists, are suppressed, when there is political repression. And we have to, we have to deepen and organize, deepen our connections amongst the people, because it's that is our greatest protection from the state, from fascist forces. It's actual community organizing. It's community resources and community connections. So, get out there and not just, I want to do that whole liberal, meet your neighbor. Organize a third space. That's fucking lame as shit. I mean, obviously those things are fun, but that's not actually going to confront anything going on in your community, actually. I mean, it's an important first step. But also it doesn't really see the issue that it's not just an issue of love versus hate. It's class struggle, right? The forces of the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, are very well organized. They have an agenda, and they're working comprehensively to win every single point of their agenda, from rare earth minerals down to traditional families, And so the same way us, the left wing, the leftists, the radicals, the revolutionaries, we ultimately also have to be even more organized and have our own even more comprehensive plan and work through every point of the plan and wage that class struggle. So yeah, speaking of class struggle, we're going to talk about some of the working people of the world.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know how tuned in people are to more international protests, but I think there's been a curious thing that's been happening in India these past couple months. For those of y'all that aren't aware of the situation, let's get into it. So, in May 2026, Surya Kant, the Chief Justice of India, made a comment about how activists and unemployed youth are "quote unquote" cockroaches and the parasites of society. So, from that came the inspiration of a sort of parody political party known as the Cockroach Janta Party, which is a play on the phrase, plus the BJP party, which presently rules India. So it was started off as a joke by a digital communication strategist who used to volunteer with the more centrist party in India. But I'd say within the past month, it's turned into some more serious militant protests by many youth in the nation. So they've been focusing mostly on education reform, calling for the education minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, to resign after these high stakes entrance examinations for colleges and government jobs were leaked. This was a pretty serious deal, because I think anybody who knows anything about Indian culture understands there's like a certain like underlying stigma that has to do with somebody's like caste position. And if like imagine if you went to a school and then suddenly your test scores got leaked and everybody knows you didn't make it to a certain college. The stigma that's associated with that is much bigger than people are just being like, haha, you're a failure. That says, to some people that's an existential thing, And so it ended up resulting in about a dozen people taking their lives from that, because unfortunately, for a lot of younger folks, they saw that as like the end of their world, which it isn't, but it has much higher implications in in Indian society. Even if like let's say they were to take the exam later and like do well, the fact that their name is out there and somebody could look that up and be like, oh, you failed this exam once, they could have to carry that for the rest of their lives. And that's what a lot of people are pissed about. And so part of what they're calling for is the reformation of the examination system as itself, as well as compensation for the families of the students who took their lives after the exam results leaked. And there's been a lot of developments just within the past week alone. So I'd say like one of the more important things was that there was an activist, Sonam Wangchuk, who was forcibly moved to the hospital by police this past Saturday. He started a hunger strike about a month ago on June 28th. And this is like something that he's had a pattern of doing in the past when protesting for or against certain things. But it seems like, during this most recent political uprising, it's played a galvanizing role in getting people involved, realizing that this important activist who was, basically put in jail for, their action, people saw this as a pretty serious thing. And so yesterday, thousands of people attempted to march on Parliament, but were met with violence by the police. They had to deal with tear gas. They had to deal with some pretty heavy batons. A lot of people got brutalized. A bunch of people got sent to the hospital. And this was all after they tried to leave the protest area that they had established in Jantar Mantar Park in New Delhi. So as of today, based on what I was reading earlier today, protesters have stated that they're going to keep protesting, but there has been some hesitance around trying to mobilize against Parliament due to police repression. There's probably about like 5,000. I think the main number I've seen was like 5,000 people are still keeping the protest going. And I'm not necessarily keeping it off the table that they're going to try and put forward some militant actions, but I think it's one of those things where it's like, there's sometimes you try to make an advance, sometimes you have to retreat and see what the situation is. Beaten up by the cops can be a pretty serious deal, and you don't want to just keep running your head against the wall and seeing what happens from that. So I don't know. I think this is pretty interesting because it seems like a pretty organic political movement that's come out of something that was initially like a joke and like poking fun at the government. But I think the thing that it really points to for me, even though like parts of basically their central demands in their manifesto are more around like, reforming the state, like one of the demands has to do with like having a requirement that 50% of all seats in parliament be for women instead of 30%, stuff like that. I still think it's, important because like people are getting out there in the streets. They're seeing the corruption that exists in their government. They're trying to push for their demands, and they see this as a moment to really try to push things forward. So, I don't know. What have you heard about this stuff? What do you think about all of it?
Well, I only hear things about, or I've only heard about these recent protests from other, content pages on social media, right? Like, obviously, in America, we don't hear about foreign protests unless
Even if it's in a country of 1 billion people.
Yeah, but we only hear about protests in other countries if it, like, plays into whatever particular media narrative is relevant for a country, right? Unless you are, a South Asian person that pays attention to the diaspora news, for instance. Yeah. Right. Another example is I just love the issue of protests, right? Internationally protests. Because let's go to just before we talk about what's going on in India, I always want to just talk about what's going on like with the Iranian protests, right? Like it's like only time you're going to have the U.S. president talk about protecting protesters when it plays into some aspect of U.S. foreign policy, right? Like when there's that issue of the Iranian government allegedly shooting or harming protesters in Iran. The U.S. media covered it extensively under the idea, like, look how terrible the Iranians are, and we need to go in and save these protesters by getting rid of the Ayatollah, right? And of course, there's more to that situation. Turned out there are all kinds of Mossad-affiliated groups moving weapons into the country. There's also the general just media blackout that oftentimes it took a long time to figure out exactly what was going on. And that was all secondary because all this reporting was done for the idea that the United States government can fix this by going in and replacing their government. The difference being here is that the Indian government is very much like in bed with the U.S. government. I mean, Narendra Modi was in the fucking Epstein files, for the love of God, right? Like Narendra Modi reached out to Jeffrey Epstein to organize a meeting between him and Trump. So that was his first visit to the United States, or his first meeting with President Trump was negotiated through Jeffrey Epstein. Can you believe that shit? And so I think this present period of protests in India is indicative of just like the level of class contradiction in India right now, where even like these spontaneous protests of non-politically affiliated but politically aware young people are just rising up in an urban setting. Because I think according from the CPI Maoist perspective, the revolutionary movement is not nearly as strong in the urban areas as it is in the rural areas. Right, and so this is, it's actually quite significant because to say that there's no, urban protest movement in Indian cities, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that in this society, dominantly, it's like the people on the periphery that are taking the most militant action against this fascist government that they have. So to see these young people barrel headfirst, fighting that same fascist state is quite impressive. It is quite commendable, and we also see how it's politically limited. Like the student activists at this moment do not have the means to wage an armed struggle against the fascist Indian government. They're not able to defend themselves properly against groups of armed men shooting at them, right? So there's real serious decisions that they have to make about what they're trying to do right now, right? Because the success of the movement should not be predicated on everybody getting shot. Right, if everybody gets shot, then the movement has effectively been liquidated. Somebody can't get shot and go to prison. Somebody's got to stay out and stay intact to continue the movement. And I think that's the the struggle they're at right now, is that their initial demands, their liberal reforms, are flatly rejected, and they've experienced nothing but violence at the hands of their democratic government, so-called democratic government. And so it'll be interesting to see like how these threads, how they interact with the masses in India. Like, will these different threads of student activists? Because what we see, what happens whenever there's a spontaneous movement is when it's crushed, it sort of scatters. There's a scattering, right? There's the people that themselves are arrested. There are those that are martyred. These folks often become focuses of later activism, right? There's those groups that disagree over tactics and strategy as the movement's collapsing. And maybe they're going to go off and form other organizations. Are they going to unite with the ongoing revolutionary movement in India? There's some interesting questions that are being asked right now, and they will be answered in time. And so this is something to pay attention to, because I think, it goes to the question, why do we care? Why is it that we're coming to you, talking to you about spontaneous youth protests in India? It's like, well, because, it's a country of over 1 billion people. And even if there wasn't a country over 1 billion people, it does matter what happens around the world. Revolution in India, social change in India has a massive impact for the rest of the world. Same way that an imperialist country like the United States, if our form of government were to change, if our people here were better to organize themselves, it would have titanic impacts around the world today. What happens to the Indian government affects people all over the continent of Asia and around the world, right? Our U.S. government impacts the lives of millions of people around the world, not just even mentioning the genocide of the Palestinian people, which is maintained through U.S. imperialism in its principal form in the Middle East, which is Zionism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's just important to emphasize, I think just as Americans, it's really easy to fall into this very narrow way of only seeing what's around us, in our city, in our state, even just in the nation. And it's important to really take to heart that there's a whole world out there where lots of different things are happening. It's important to really try to understand that the best we can. And I think, I agree with what you're saying. It's really important that, as this sort of tactical retreat is happening today for these students during this really militant protest, that, people take the time to assess the situation. I earnestly do believe the people who are going to be leaders in the future in this protest and in general, they probably aren't that now. They probably aren't the people that are being talked about on social media, listed in Wikipedia pages, whatever it might be. And I think that's, the only way we're going to figure out who that is if people really struggle together and people step up over time, Yeah, I think these protests are definitely a big step forward for a lot of folks, but it's important that people look to build on this, or else I could very easily see an instance where some of the people who are named in these articles, they end up being vote for me, or follow me in this party or whatever, instead of actually trying to put forward a vision for the future that's actually going to start to try to tackle these problems,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
I always struggle how to close this out. Oh, I know exactly. I know exactly how. All right, so stay tuned for the end of this episode, because we're going to bring you some of our interviews from our rally over the weekend. So you get to hear from Urban Peace Movement, the Alliance against Racist and Political Repression, and even got some interviews from Poor Magazine. So that's going to come in right now. Yeah, record a little bit. We can do some B-roll, I'm speaking into two microphones. What's up? We're out here on the street doing man on the street interviews, which are okay. They're going okay. We're out here. They're getting ready for this vigil of a person who was killed on Monday by Oakland PD. They're not releasing any details, their name, how he was killed, what he was killed over. They've had a lot of vague language implying that he was armed, which is why he had to be murdered in cold blood. And the speaker program is starting.
OPD, the biggest game! The biggest game! Alright, now let's get louder. Yeah. New bitch! New bitch!
New bitch!
Same game!
Same game!
OPD! OPD, the biggest game!
It's a problematic chant, but I like it. All right, you can cut.
We're here today to mourn the life of a man killed by Oakland Police Department Monday afternoon. Shame!
Shame!
They have not released any real justification for his killing. Shame!
Shame!
They're trying to say that he was in possession of some kind of weapon, but they have yet to release any body cam footage of the actual incident. Shame!
Shame!
They killed him right over here in our streets where people are raising their children. Are they expected to believe that at any point in time they could just be killed for no good reason?
No!
Shame on OPD!
Shame!
Shame on OPD!
Shame!
We are not going to put up with this anymore. This is their third killing this year.
Shame!
Third killing?
Yeah. They killed already 3 people this year.
Introduce yourself to the viewers at home.
Yeah, I am Romaine Charity.
Awesome. So, Romaine, do you want to tell us just a little bit about why we're out here today?
Yeah, I am the Impacted Families Committee Chair of the Oakland Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. We are an anti-police crimes organization working with families to get justice and fighting for community control of the police. On Monday afternoon, about right here, OPD had responded to a CHP call. They were chasing a man from a homeless encampment. The police chief, newly seated, may I add, James Beer, said in a press conference that he was being investigated because CHP thought he had dangerous weapons. Why they even thought that, I have no idea. But apparently they chased him from his tent to about right here where 2 Oakland police officers shot and killed him. They said that he lunged at them with a quote-unquote bladed weapon. They still have not released any justification, no crime that this man has committed. And there's been no body cam footage. There's been no transparency on this case. And we demand that transparency. We demand body cam footage, something. Like, this man just lost his life in the middle of the street, you know?
And so what exactly is the Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression? What are y'all demanding out here today from Oakland PD?
Yeah, so we are part of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. We were founded in 1973 in the fight to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. We are fighting to defend Black and working class communities from forms of state violence, including mass incarceration and, of course, police brutality. We are out here to say enough is enough. This is the third, OPD officer-involved shooting this year. We're not going back to that dark era before the federal oversight where they violated over 100 people's civil rights, all but one who were African American. We're not going back to that.
Yeah.
We need more oversight, more transparency, more accountability, not less.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that we understand that we're, like you said, this is the third police killing of 2026 alone in Oakland, right? We're trying to not go back to this era of dark age, but at the same time, we also recognize we're at this period, at least for the older folks here, for the older folks at home. I've already I've already marched for all of these accountability causes, right? Like I remember when they got the body cam footages. I remember when the use of force guidelines were updated. I remember when they started introducing crisis intervention training. I remember when they started doing all of that. I remember when federal oversight became a thing. But we're still here, actually. The police are still out to kill with impunity. And these basic reforms that we've already put in the laws, put into law, are not being followed. So I just think it's so important that in this era in which, like, you know, we can't even defund one police department, right? We haven't defunded one police department. Look it up. We did not defund one police department. Look it up. Anyone who says so is lying. Like, we have not one, right? And so, like, that's the stakes. I think it's important that people understand, like, why it's so important that y'all are out here today, that we are out here today.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we can't have defundment or really any reform without a democratic process led by Oakland and her people, not the dark money of the East Bay billionaires, but an actual working class led movement for community control of the police. That is what the Black Panthers have demanded historically, but also even before the Black Panthers, all oppressed people, all they wanted is democratic control over who is policing their communities, having an actual, oversight board with teeth. And we have one of the strongest in the country. The police commission that was formed and strengthened in 2016 is very powerful, having investigative power, having hiring and firing power of the police, which is what we, demand all over the country as the National Alliance. But it is being consistently attacked by the police union and the police union's, city council members that they have in their pocket. The mayor just put out a proposed budget to again, cut the budget of the police commission and the civilian police review agency. That is already a critically low budget. Well, police are spending like millions, like tens of millions of dollars on overtime.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
All right, what's up, y'all? I'm Dayton here at the Rising Tide Podcast. And could you introduce yourself one more time for the folks?
I'm Mateo Ramirez with the Urban Peace Movement.
Cool. First, let's tell us a little bit. What is Urban Peace Movement about?
Urban Peace Movement is a youth empowerment group based in Oakland, but we also have a South County group as well.
Cool. And why are y'all out here today?
Today we're out here to hold the police accountable. I mean, they have yet to release the transparency that we need within this case. I mean, they really haven't told us anything. They haven't told us the weapon that was used, or the weapon that they had, or how they were supposedly a threat. All we know is that they tried some less lethal methods and then ended up shooting him. We have no information, and we need to hold them accountable. We need that transparency.
Absolutely. And so I just wanted to get this point, because you're with the Youth Empowerment Organization. So how old are you, just for let the folks know?
I'm 17.
Hell yeah.
And our
makes me feel very old.
Our youngest person within Urban Peace Movement is 14.
Okay, well, as a man on his second marriage, that makes me feel bad. Just kidding. So, I mean, as a young person, what do you think comes to mind for, like, young people when they see things that go on in their communities? Like, not just, I'm saying, violence in general, but particularly when the violence is coming from the government, right? Like, how do you think that this lack of accountability, this shadiness, even just the fact that it's the state that's behind all this, how do you think this bodes for young people as a young person? Like, how do you think you think youth will respond to this? Or what kind of feelings does this make you feel as the world you have to inherit?
I mean, to be honest, it's mostly heartbreaking. I was lucky to find a space like Urban Peace Movement, but for many kids, they're not only scared, but they feel like they can't do anything because they're kids. They don't feel the empowerment that they need to have, and it's kind of a helpless feeling.
Mm-hmm. It is helpless, and I think, but if we look at historically, it's like all our major social movements have been led by young people, right? Here we are in Oakland, California, home of the Black Panther Party. The youngest member of the Black Panther Party when they first started was 14 years old as well, right? So it's the same basic lineage. of young people trying to do something, right? Like, obviously, folks are young, but even the fact that I ran into this group of young people, some of which drove up all the way from Hayward because they heard about a man getting shot in Oakland, you know, it made me, as an aging man, feel inspired to meet you today. I wanted you to know that.
Thank you.
So, what do you think What do you think y'all and your comrades are trying to accomplish with being out here today?
Being out here, we need to show the Oakland police that we want transparency and we demand it.
Hell
Not
yeah.
only do we demand justice, but we need to know this man's story and what happened, because the way they speak about him is dehumanizing. They use words like subject, like the subject was killed. This man was a human. This was a person just like me and you. He had conversations just like us, and to think that within however long it took, they threw his life away that quickly, we need to know why, and we need to know the truth.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you so much for speaking to me today. So I'm going to look forward to the rest of this rally and just, to the future, that we can get these youth empowered and start changing some of this stuff.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Thank you for interviewing me.
Of course, thank you. Cool. All right, you just hit the record.
And then claiming, like they always do about poor and indigenous and black and brown people, that he had a weapon. Well, first of all, if you living on the street, you definitely have tools to survive on the street. If you're being pursued with people with guns and mace and batons, what are you gonna do? And why is there this presumption of guilt and this essentially lying on his name when we don't even know the brother's name? We don't know what his life was. But that's what capitalism likes to do, right? Is create this myth about the homeless people. Like we're crazy, lazy, dumb, and a bum. Like we're automatically dangerous. And like implicitly, oh yeah, he was dangerous. But that's already the myth that's out there. That's why people do what I call the violent act of looking away.
All right, y'all. That's been episode 10 of The Rising Tide, y'all. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah.
You got any questions, criticisms, comments about what we cover, you can cover that right here. That's all I got. What you got, Tim?
Yeah. Thanks for sticking with us. Be sure to check out all our content on YouTube. We got this interview from this protest last weekend. We got this interview from a couple weeks ago that I did with one of the folks from the Anchor Brewers Union. We're doing our best to get out there, get these interviews, get this content up there, and also get your feedback about stuff. What do y'all think about this new content? What do you think about our episodes? What do you think about the new camera that we're using? Does it look good? Do we look even more sexy and smart on camera? I would hope so. But if we don't, always looking for feedback. Constructive feedback, positive feedback. And yeah, appreciate the support regardless. And until next time.
Later.
Peace.